The galaxy had never been quiet. There was always something. Trade traffic humming between stars, military channels barking orders, entertainment streams spilling noise into the void. Even war had a rhythm. Explosions, alarms, distress calls. Sound meant life. Sound meant control. Then, without warning, the noise stopped. It began in a wealthy star system near the galactic core. One moment, it was alive with shipping lanes and defense platforms. Next, it vanished from the network. No signals. No emergency beacons. No debris fields. Not even background radiation. Just nothing. At first, officials blamed a communications failure. Then a sensor error. Then sabotage. But as hours passed, panic began to spread. A reconnaissance fleet was dispatched. Fast ships, veteran crews, layered defenses. They were expected to return within days. They never did. Weeks later, a second system went silent. Then a third. Each one disappeared the same way. No warning. No survivors. No explanation. Across the galaxy, fear grew like a shadow no one could outrun. Strategists gathered. Admirals argued. Scientists fought over theories. Some claimed a natural phenomenon. Others whispered about ancient weapons or forgotten gods. One name surfaced again and again, quietly at first, almost as a joke. Humans. Earth. A small, dangerous species from the outer regions. A death-world civilization that had once struggled just to leave its own gravity well. Humans were known for aggression, creativity, and short lifespans, but not for power. They had never ruled anything important. They had never controlled trade routes. They had never won a major galactic war. Most records described them as potentially troublesome and easily contained. So the idea that humans were behind the silence was dismissed. Until the data arrived. A deep space relay station, ancient and mostly forgotten, suddenly activated. It broadcasts on every known frequency at once. The message was heavily encrypted, but human in origin. The galaxy froze as experts broke the code. When the encryption finally fell, the message was painfully simple. No threats. No demands. No explanations. Only 6 words. This is retaliation. Do not respond. The message repeated once, then the relay destroyed itself. Silence returned. Now fear turned into terror. Emergency sessions were called across every major power. Military readiness jumped to maximum. Fleets were recalled from distant wars. Defensive lines were redrawn overnight. But there was a problem. No one knew what Earth was retaliating for. Digging into records revealed something deeply uncomfortable. Decades earlier, several human colonies on the edge of explored space had vanished. Sparse outposts, mining worlds, population centers too small to matter politically. They had been erased quietly during a border security operation carried out by a powerful coalition. No witnesses, no survivors. The incident had been classified, signed, archived, and forgotten. Humans had never been notified. They had never protested. They had never retaliated. They had never even asked questions. They had simply gone silent. At the time, the galaxy assumed Earth was weak or afraid. Now, analysts began to understand the truth. Earth had not gone silent in defeat. Earth had gone silent to prepare. More systems fell. Not planets this time, fleets. Entire armadas disappeared mid-translation. Ships entering hyperspace simply failed to exit. Navigation logs ended abruptly, as if reality itself had closed around them. Weapons fired at nothing. Shields absorbed no impact. Defense grids reported no intrusion. It was as if the enemy was not attacking from space, but editing it. Survivors, rare, shaken, and barely believed, described shapes that sensors could not track. Ships that did not broadcast identification, did not maneuver like known vessels, and did not pursue fleeing targets. They appeared, acted once, and were gone. No taunts, no pursuit, no mercy, just precision. One senior analyst finally spoke about what others feared. This isn't war, he said. This is accounting. That was when Earth spoke again. This time, the message was not broadcast. It was delivered directly to the highest military councils of the galaxy. A single data package. Inside it were names, coordinates, dates, casualty numbers. Every destroyed system matched a line on the list. Each strike balanced perfectly against the lives lost in those forgotten human colonies. No more, no less. At the bottom of the file was a counter. It was still counting down. The realization hit like a physical blow. Earth was not angry. Earth was not panicking. Earth was not seeking conquest. Humanity was finishing a calculation that had begun decades ago. And when it was complete, no one knew what would happen next. As the last system in the day's cycle went silent, a veteran admiral stared at the stars and whispered the thought no one dared say aloud. If this is retaliation, what does their full response look like? The universe waited, and for the first time in history, it was afraid of the quiet. The galaxy tried to breathe. After the shock of the first revelations, leaders told themselves that understanding the enemy would restore control. Every war had patterns. Every species had limits. Humans, no matter how dangerous, had to follow rules of physics, logistics, and fear. So the galaxy did what it always did when afraid. It investigated. Hidden archives were opened. Old war logs were pulled from deep storage. Border incident reports, classified operations, and sealed tribunal records were reviewed for the first time in decades. What they found made the silence heavier. The destruction of the human frontier colonies had not been an accident. It had been planned carefully. The coalition that carried it out believed humans would be too weak, too divided, and too politically insignificant to matter. The operation had been efficient. Orbital strikes, communication blackouts, total population loss. No survivors, no witnesses, no evidence left behind. The official conclusion had been simple. Human expansion threat neutralized. At the time, it felt final. Now, it felt like the opening move of a long-delayed disaster. Military analysts began tracking Earth's behavior after the incident. That was when patterns emerged. After losing their colonies, humans did not lash out. They did not build larger fleets in public shipyards. They did not threaten neighbors or demand justice from the galactic councils. Instead, Earth closed itself. Trade slowed. Diplomatic missions returned home. Human presence faded from shared space. Even their communication style changed. Shorter messages, fewer broadcasts, more encryption. To the galaxy, it looked like retreat. To human historians, it would later be called the long silence. During that silence, Earth did something no other species had ever done. It stopped preparing for war and started preparing for certainty. Human industry shifted underground. Entire manufacturing networks were moved inside asteroids, moons, and hollowed planets far from trade lanes. Their fleets stopped using known jump paths. Their research facilities disappeared from all public databases. The galaxy noticed none of it. Why would it? Humans were no longer considered relevant. That was the greatest mistake of all. When Earth struck back, the galaxy assumed these were experimental weapons, prototypes, desperate measures. But captured fragments of data told a different story. Human weapons were not new. They were mature. They had been tested, refined, rebuilt, and perfected over decades. Each system erased during the retaliation revealed more clues. Energy signatures unlike anything known. Space-time distortions that behaved as if they were designed, not caused. Human ships were not overpowering defenses. They were bypassing the concept of defense entirely. One scientific council finally reached a terrifying conclusion. Human technology was not focused on destroying ships or planets. It was focused on removing targets from existence. No debris meant no recovery. No explosions meant no warning. No survivors meant no stories. War, to humans, had become silent and permanent. As fear spread, smaller civilizations began sending private messages to Earth. Some begged for mercy. Some offered alliances. Some confessed to past support of the coalition, hoping honesty would save them. Earth responded to none of them. The silence was deliberate. Inside one major military command center, an aging strategist studied the casualty list again. The balance was exact. Each human life taken was being matched with precision. Not doubled. Not multiplied. Matched. That's restraint, he said quietly. Not rage. And restraint was far more frightening. Meanwhile, rumors began to circulate among fringe traders and deep space scavengers. They spoke of places where human ships had been seen years before the retaliation began. Dark systems far from charts. Regions of space where sensors failed and navigation behaved strangely. Some claimed humans had learned to hide entire fleets inside distorted space, waiting without decay, without energy loss. Others whispered something worse. That humans had learned how to pause time itself, storing weapons and soldiers until the exact moment they were needed. Most dismissed these stories as panic. Then the evidence arrived. A damaged listening post on the edge of known space suddenly began transmitting. It had been inactive for centuries. No known species still used its technology. But the signal was clean. Humans. The message was not a threat. It was a warning. It explained, in simple terms, that Earth had cataloged every hostile act committed against it. Not only the destruction of colonies, but every ignored distress call, every denied request for aid, every vote that allowed the massacre to be buried. The retaliation was not limited to soldiers. It included decisions, civilizations that had approved the operation, industries that had funded it, governments that had profited from human loss. All were on the list. The galaxy realized something then that shattered hope. This was not revenge. Revenge ends when anger fades. This was a correction. Correction ends only when balance is restored. Some leaders argued that humanity could still be stopped, that if enough fleets were gathered, if enough firepower was thrown at Earth, the threat could be crushed. Others knew better. Humanity had waited too long, planned too carefully. They were not reacting. They were executing a plan that assumed resistance. And then came the discovery that ended all debate. Long-range sensors detected movement near Earth, not outward, but inward. Human fleets were returning home. The retaliation phase was nearing completion. Whatever came next would not be improvised. It would be intentional. A final data leak reached the councils shortly after. It showed something humans had built during the long silence. Not a ship, not a weapon, a framework. A system designed to enforce consequences across the galaxy automatically, without debate, without delay, without mercy. Once activated, it would make future retaliation unnecessary. The galaxy would police itself, or be erased. The counter embedded in Earth's earlier transmission ticked down again. Only a few numbers remained. And for the first time, the galaxy understood the truth too late. Humanity had not prepared for war. Humanity had prepared to make war obsolete, by making disobedience fatal. As the lights dimmed in another distant system, a council member whispered the question everyone feared. When the counting ends, who decides what comes next? Fear eventually turns into defiance. For a time, the galaxy had frozen, watching systems vanish, fleets disappear, and the human counter ticked downward with perfect indifference. Silence ruled because no one knew how to answer it. But empires were not built on patience. They were built on belief and force. And so, at last, the galaxy decided to fight back. The largest military coalition in known history was formed in secret. Dozens of civilizations contributed ships, weapons, and commanders. Old rivals stood side by side, bound by one shared terror. If Earth was not stopped now, no power would ever be safe again. This would not be another scattered defense. This would be overwhelming retaliation. The plan was simple. A massive strike aimed not at Earth itself, but at the unseen human fleets. If humanity was hiding its forces beyond normal space, then the galaxy would tear those hiding places open. Experimental weapons were activated, gravity breakers, dimensional anchors, reality stabilizers. Entire regions of space were flooded with energy designed to expose anything concealed. For the first time since the silence began, the galaxy acted loudly. And humanity responded, not with anger, not with urgency, with precision. As the coalition fleets moved into position, something strange happened. Navigation systems began to lag. Clocks aboard different ships drifted out of sync by microseconds, then minutes. Commanders shouted orders that arrived too late. Targeting solutions adjusted themselves incorrectly. Weapons locked onto empty space. The fleet had not been attacked. It had been desynchronized. Then the first human ship appeared. It did not emerge from hyperspace. It did not decloak. It simply existed, where nothing had been a moment before. Sensors struggled to define its shape. Its mass readings fluctuated as if it refused to settle into one state of being. The ship did not fire. It did not maneuver. It waited. More appeared. Hundreds. Then thousands. Human vessels surrounded the coalition armada in perfect silence, forming a sphere that stretched beyond visual range. They did not jam communications. They did not issue demands. They allowed the galaxy to see the scale of what it faced. Panic broke discipline. Several coalition ships opened fire. Their weapons passed straight through the human vessels as if they were firing at shadows. Others detonated harmlessly, their energy absorbed without resistance. Then the human fleet moved. Not forward, not aggressively. It contracted. Space itself folded inward. Coalition ships found themselves closer together without having moved. Hulls screamed as unseen forces twisted structural frames. And then, quietly, efficiently, ships began to vanish. Not explode, not break apart. They were removed. Each disappearance was clean, contained, and final. Human ships targeted command vessels first. Admirals watched their escorts vanish one by one, powerless to intervene. Orders dissolved into chaos as the chain of command collapsed in seconds. One commander attempted to retreat. His ship accelerated, then stopped. Time aboard his vessel slowed to a crawl. Crew members froze mid-motion, eyes wide, mouths open, trapped between moments. The human ship approached. A single transmission entered the frozen vessel's systems. Resistance acknowledged. Balance continues. Then time resumed. The ship was gone. Across the battle zone, the coalition fleet disintegrated, not through destruction, but subtraction. Within minutes, the largest armada ever assembled ceased to exist. The galaxy had tried to fight back, and failed without landing a single blow. Shockwaves rippled outward, not physical ones, but political and psychological. Worlds that had planned resistance abandoned it instantly. Fleets stood down. Weapons were powered off mid-engagement. Humanity had demonstrated something far worse than superior firepower. They had demonstrated control. They chose when battles began. They chose when they ended. They chose who existed afterward. In the aftermath, Earth finally broke its silence publicly. A transmission was broadcast across all channels. It was not encrypted. It was not dramatic. It was calm. A human figure appeared, unarmed, unarmored, standing alone. Their faces showed exhaustion, not triumph. They spoke slowly, clearly, in language simplified for universal translation. This coalition believed we could be forced to stop, the humans said. That is incorrect. They explained that human retaliation systems were automated, layered, and self-correcting. No single fleet, no single victory, and no single negotiation could halt the process once begun. Retaliation was not controlled by leaders. It was controlled by records. Human history has taught them that emotion fades, but data endures. So they built systems that remembered everything, every loss, every choice, every silence. The galaxy was not being punished for fighting back. It was being punished for pretending the past did not matter. The transmission ended with a warning. We are not expanding, the humans said. We are concluding. That word echoed across the stars. Concluding. As panic spread, something even worse emerged. Independent analysts realized that human retaliation was accelerating. Each failed resistance removed uncertainty. Each attack refined their systems further. The counter, once slow and deliberate, began to move faster. Numbers dropped more rapidly now. Earth was no longer testing responses. Earth was finished. On distant worlds, populations watched the stars dim and wondered if their past decisions had already sealed their fate. Governments collapsed under fear. Long-hidden crimes surfaced as leaders attempted desperate confessions. None of it mattered. Human systems did not respond to apologies. They responded to history. And history was already written. In the quiet aftermath of the failed counterstrike, one final discovery emerged from the wreckage of coalition command data. Humans had anticipated the resistance. Every tactic, every weapon, every escalation, which meant something far more terrifying was true. The galaxy had just played its strongest card, and humanity had treated it as a footnote. As another system went dark, this one closer to the core than any before, a single realization spread like ice through every surviving civilization. If this was still retaliation, then the next phase would not be about balance. It would be about permanence, and nothing in the universe was prepared for that. After the failed counterstrike, the galaxy stopped pretending. Fleets returned to dockyards and never left. The shipyards went dark. Military channels filled with silence, not orders. Every civilization understood the same truth at the same time. Force no longer mattered. Humanity had crossed beyond it. With war off the table, the galaxy turned to something else, understanding. If Earth could not be stopped, then perhaps it could be predicted. And if it could be predicted, perhaps there was still a way to survive what was coming. So analysts stopped studying battles. They studied patterns. The vanished systems were mapped again, this time not by power or location, but by meaning. Economic value, political influence, historical role in the coalition that destroyed the human colonies. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Human retaliation was not random. It was not emotional. It was not even strategic in the traditional sense. It was judicial. Each strike matched a specific decision, not just a casualty. Worlds that had voted to approve the operation vanished. Corporations that had funded it collapsed when their core systems disappeared. Intelligence hubs that had buried evidence were erased without warning. Even worlds that had not fired a single shot, but had looked away, began to feel pressure. Trade routes failed. Communication relays broke down. Economic lifelines quietly vanished. Humanity was not only targeting killers. They were targeting enablers. This realization broke something deep inside the galactic order. For centuries, power had meant distance. Leaders made decisions far from consequences. Votes were cast in clean halls, while violence happened in distant space. Humans had destroyed that distance. Every decision now carried weight. Every vote had a shadow. Every silence could be fatal. And then came the most disturbing discovery of all. A team of scientists, working in total secrecy, finally decoded fragments of human architecture left behind in a neutral system. What they found did not resemble a superweapon, a fleet command, or a doomsday device. It was something else entirely. A framework. Humanity had not built a weapon to end this war. They had built a system to prevent the next one. The framework was layered across space itself. Not centralized. Not controllable. It used no command structure that could be attacked or negotiated with. Instead, it was observed. It was recorded. It was learned. Every act of violence, every political decision, every suppression of truth fed into it. The framework compared present actions with historical outcomes, adjusting future responses automatically. To humans, it was not a machine. It was a memory. Human history has taught them a brutal lesson. Peace agreements fail, alliances decay, and promises are forgotten. Only consequences endure. So they built consequences into reality. The framework did not judge intent. It did not weigh excuses. It did not care about apologies. It measured impact. If a civilization's actions created suffering beyond an acceptable threshold, the framework responded. Not with war. Not with negotiation. With removal. Entire systems could be isolated from space-time. Fleets could be erased mid-thought. Infrastructure could fail without warning, leaving societies intact but powerless. Violence no longer escalated. It simply ended. When this information reached the galactic councils, panic turned into despair. One council member asked the question everyone feared. Can it be turned off? The answer was immediate. No. The framework was distributed across space in ways that could not be mapped or destroyed. Even humanity no longer directly controlled it. They had built it to operate without them, because humans understood their own flaws too well. They did not trust themselves with absolute power. So they removed choice from the system entirely. This was not domination. It was abdication. Humanity had stepped away from ruling the galaxy and replaced rule with law, an unbreakable, unforgiving law written in physics instead of words. Across the stars, civilizations began to panic in new ways. Some attempted to rewrite their histories, deleting records of past crimes. The framework did not respond. Some tried to surrender preemptively, dismantling militaries and offering resources to Earth. The framework did not respond. Some attempted mass evacuations, fleeing systems they believed were marked. The framework did not respond. Humanity did not need to respond anymore. The system already had. Then Earth transmitted again. This time, it was not a warning or an explanation. It was a confession. The human speaker explained that the framework had been born from failure, from the knowledge that humans, too, had committed atrocities throughout their history, that they had justified them, forgotten them, and repeated them. Humanity had not built the framework because they were righteous. They built it because they were dangerous. To survive, the humans said, we had to make sure no one, including us, could ever do this again without consequence. The statement shook the galaxy. For the first time, the truth became clear. Humanity was not punishing the universe. Humanity was punishing the idea that power excused cruelty. The counter embedded in the earlier transmission ticked down again. Only a handful of numbers remained. And now, with horrifying clarity, analysts understood what the end of the count meant. It was not the end of retaliation. It was the activation of permanence. Once the counter reached 0, the framework would shift modes. Retaliation would end. Enforcement would begin. From that moment on, the galaxy would live under a constant, silent evaluation. Not ruled by humans. Not governed by councils. Governed by consequence. A young diplomat, staring at the data late into the cycle, finally spoke aloud what no one wanted to admit. "We didn't anger them," she said. "We taught them. Taught them that promises meant nothing. That treaties could be ignored. Those small lives could be erased quietly. Humanity had learned the lesson perfectly, and now they were teaching it back to the universe, slowly, carefully, and without mercy." As another system dimmed, this one known more for its votes than its weapons, the galaxy realized something chilling. The most powerful weapon humans had ever built was not their fleets. It was their refusal to forget. And once the counting stopped, for the first time in history, the universe would live with a memory that never faded. The galaxy had reached a breaking point. Not because more systems were lost, those had become expected, but because the pattern was now undeniable. Entire civilizations that had once shaped history were being reduced to footnotes, not through conquest, but through consequence. And still, the counter continued to fall. In response, the galaxy did what it had avoided for centuries. It unified, not in war, but in desperation. Every surviving major power sent representatives to a single emergency assembly. It was not held in a capital world or a fortified station, but in open space, aboard a neutral platform stripped of weapons. No shields, no fleets nearby, no illusions of strength. The message was clear. This was not a negotiation between equals. This was a plea. The assembly chamber filled with beings of every shape and biology, many of whom had never shared a room before. Some had been enemies for generations. Others had never acknowledged each other's existence. Now they sat together in silence, waiting for Earth to answer. When the human delegation finally appeared, there was no escort fleet, no show of force, no technological display, just one ship. It arrived without warning, without distortion, and without drama. It docked cleanly, precisely, as if it had always been expected. A single human entered the chamber. No armor, no insignia, no visible weapon. They looked tired, not wounded, not afraid, just exhausted in a way that spoke of long memories and longer nights. The room held its breath. The human did not sit. They did not stand at a podium. They remained where they were, hands relaxed, eyes moving calmly across the assembly. "You asked for this meeting," the human said. "So speak." The first voice to answer was from a civilization that had once commanded half the galaxy. Its representative spoke carefully, choosing words as if they might detonate. "We acknowledge wrongdoing," the representative said. "We acknowledge past actions taken against your species. We offer restitution, reparations, territory, anything you ask." Others joined quickly. Apologies followed. Confessions followed. Accusations turned inward as leaders scrambled to distance themselves from old decisions. Some begged openly. Some wept. Some tried to bargain. The human listened to all of it without interruption. When the chamber finally fell silent again, the human spoke. "You misunderstand," they said quietly. "This meeting is not happening because we want something." The words landed heavily. "We already calculated what was owed," the human continued. "That calculation is nearly complete." A ripple of panic moved through the room. One representative stood suddenly. "Then tell us what to do," they demanded. "Tell us how to stop this." The human met their gaze. "You can't." The finality of the answer crushed what little hope remained. Another voice rose, trembling with controlled fear. "Then why are you here?" The human paused. "Because you deserve to understand," they said. "Not to change the outcome, but to survive what comes after." That was when the truth emerged fully. The human explained that retaliation was never meant to be endless. It was meant to be finite, precise, and instructional. Every strike so far had been part of a closed ledger, names matched to consequences, actions matched to response. That ledger was almost balanced. What followed would be different. Once the count reaches 0, the human said, the framework becomes permanent. Murmurs filled the chamber. Permanent meant no pauses, no resets, no forgiveness written into policy. It meant that from that moment on, Every civilization would live under the same system that had judged the past. The galaxy would not be ruled. It would be evaluated. One leader finally asked the question that had been avoided since the beginning. Why not forgive, they asked. Why not stop once justice is done? The humans' expression did not change, but something hardened behind their eyes. Because forgiveness didn't save our colonies, they said, and forgetting ensured it happened. They explained that humanity had begged once, too. Not loudly, not dramatically, but through treaties, shared science, and peaceful expansion. They had trusted that the galaxy's rules applied to everyone. They were wrong. When their worlds burned, no emergency council was called. No fleets rushed to intervene. No speeches were made. The galaxy had been quiet then, too. That silence had taught humanity everything it needed to know. Another representative spoke, voice shaking. Then what is our place in this new order? The human answered without hesitation. Live, they said, and choose carefully. The framework would not target civilizations for existing. It would not punish weakness, difference, or ambition. It would respond only to harm, measured not by intent, but by outcome. No more hidden massacres. No more silent erasures. No more decisions without consequence. For the first time in galactic history, power would not shield responsibility. Someone whispered, "You're turning the universe into a prison." The humans shook their head. "No," they said. "We're turning it into a memory." The counter ticked again. Only a few numbers remained. As the meeting drew to a close, the human delivered one final warning. "Retaliation ends soon," they said. "What replaces it will not hate you. It will not negotiate with you. And it will not fear you." They turned to leave. No one tried to stop them. No one could. As the human ship departed, the chamber remained frozen in stunned silence. Leaders stared at one another, realizing that their era had ended not with a battle, but with an admission. They were powerful, and they had been careless. Now, the universe would remember. In the cycles that followed, worlds rushed to reform. Militaries were dismantled overnight. Secret programs were exposed. Old crimes were confessed publicly in desperate attempts at redemption. But the framework did not respond to panic. It responded to patterns. And the patterns were already set. Far from the assembly, deep in human-controlled space, systems began shifting into their final state. Retaliation protocols wound down. Enforcement protocols came online. The last phase was approaching. As the counter reached its final digits, one thought echoed across the galaxy, spoken in countless languages, on countless worlds. The universe was about to learn what peace cost, when it was enforced not by hope, but by certainty. When the counter reached its final phase, the galaxy stopped moving. Trade routes lay empty. Borders meant nothing. Even pirates went silent, as if instinct itself warned them that violence now carried a different price. Everyone was waiting, not for an attack, but for confirmation. The framework had been explained. Its logic is exposed. Its reach implied. But belief, in the end, demanded proof. And so the universe received one last demonstration. It came from a system no one expected. The world was not a military power. It had no great fleets, no history of conquest. Its crime was quieter and more familiar. Decades earlier, it had hosted the coalition's secret tribunal. Its leaders had signed off on the operation that erased the human colonies. They had justified it as preventive stability. They had never fired a weapon. They had simply approved the paperwork. Now the system was selected. Humanity did not announce the choice. The framework did. Across every major network, a simple notice appeared, identical in format to the earlier data drops. Action acknowledged. Response pending. The system's inhabitants noticed unusual readings almost immediately. Their star behaved strangely, its output fluctuating in precise, measured pulses. Astronomers watched in confusion as energy patterns stabilized into impossible symmetry. Nothing exploded. Nothing burned. Instead, the star's excess energy was redirected. For the first time in recorded history, a civilization witnessed a stellar-scale intervention executed without violence. The star did not go supernova. It did not collapse. It was edited. Its energy output was reduced just enough to halt advanced infrastructure. Power grids failed. Jump gates shut down. Orbital platforms lost synchronization and drifted harmlessly away. Within minutes, the system was alive, but isolated. No interstellar travel. No long-range communication. No ability to project power. The population survived. Their civilization did not. The message was unmistakable. The framework did not need to kill. It could simply end relevance. Panic erupted across the galaxy, not because of destruction, but because of restraint. The realization spread faster than fear ever had. Humanity could erase worlds, but it preferred to limit harm. That restraint meant something far worse than cruelty. It meant deliberation. Analysts worked frantically, trying to understand the logic behind the selection. Why the system? Why now? The answer chilled them. The framework had waited until the last phase to demonstrate non-lethal enforcement. It wanted the galaxy to understand that what followed was not revenge. It was governance without rulers. Shortly after the demonstration, Earth transmitted one final public message. Not a speech, not a warning, a statement of record. The human speaker appeared again, older now, or perhaps simply more worn by time. Their voice carried no pride. The retaliation ledger is complete, they said. The balance is restored. Across the galaxy, countless beings watched the counter finally reach zero. It did not disappear. It changed. The numbers faded, replaced by a single symbol recognized across all translations. Active. The framework had entered its permanent state. Immediately, subtle changes rippled through space. Navigation systems adjusted automatically, avoiding high-risk trajectories. Weapons targeting software began rejecting certain parameters without explanation. Military AIs flagged scenarios not as illegal, but as non-viable. Violence had not been banned. It had been rendered inefficient. Civilizations discovered that escalation no longer worked the way it once had. Any act of aggression triggered predictive modeling across the framework, calculating second- and third-order consequences in real time. If harm exceeded thresholds, enforcement followed. No delays, no counsels, no appeals. The universe had become self-correcting. Reactions varied wildly. Some worlds celebrated, declaring an age of true peace. Others collapsed, unable to function without the leverage of force. A few attempted to test the system. Small strikes, limited attacks, controlled experiments. The framework responded every time. Quietly, precisely, decisively. Humanity did not intervene. In fact, human fleets withdrew almost entirely from shared space. Earth closed its borders again, not in secrecy, but in finality. Their role was finished. They had not claimed territory. They had not demanded tribute. They had not taken command. They had changed the rules and stepped away. Among historians, a new term emerged for what had happened. Not conquest, not extinction. Correction Event Zero. It marked the moment the universe stopped pretending that power could exist without accountability. Years passed. Children were born who would never hear a war siren. Generations grew up in a galaxy where decisions were weighed carefully, not because of morality, but because consequence was certain. And slowly, painfully, civilizations adapted. Diplomacy evolved. Conflict became rare and localized. Secrecy lost its value. The framework remembered everything. Near the edge of human space, a lone observer station recorded a final internal message, never broadcast, never shared. It was a human archival note, written for no audience but history. We did not save the universe, it read. We made it honest. There were critics, even centuries later. Voices that argued humanity had gone too far, that fear was not peace, that choice mattered more than safety. Perhaps they were right. But the stars no longer burned with endless war. And the silence that followed Earth's retaliation was no longer the silence of death. It was the silence of restraint. Far away, in that isolated system whose stars still burned softly, descendants of the old leaders looked up at the sky and told stories of the day everything changed, not with fire, but with consequence. They spoke of humans not as conquerors, but as the species that refused to forget. And in that memory, the universe finally understood the cost of ignoring small lives. Because humanity had proven one final truth, carved permanently into the fabric of reality. The most terrifying force was not anger. It was accountability, applied without exception and remembered forever. The galaxy did not celebrate. When the framework activated fully and the counter vanished, there were no victory broadcasts, no declarations of a new age, no parades beneath alien skies. What followed Earth's retaliation was not relief. It was an adjustment. An adjustment hurts. For centuries, civilizations had grown around one simple truth: power solved problems. If trade failed, the force reopened it. If borders were threatened, fleets enforced them. If inconvenient worlds resisted, they were erased quietly and forgotten. Now that truth is gone, the framework did not forbid violence, but it punished outcomes. That difference reshaped everything. The first signs appeared in small ways. A border skirmish between two rival systems escalated for the first time in decades. Old instincts took over. Ships mobilized. Weapons powered up. The attack began. Then, halfway through the engagement, both fleets lost targeting capability simultaneously. Navigation systems refused aggressive maneuvers. Command AIs flagged every next move as catastrophic. The battle stalled, not because either side chose peace, but because violence no longer worked the way it used to. Within hours, diplomats replaced admirals. Negotiations followed not because of morality, but necessity. The framework had made war impractical. Word spread quickly. Aggression now carried certainty. Not retaliation days or years later, but consequence in real time. Some civilizations adapted. They invested in diplomacy, transparency, and prevention. Disputes were resolved early, not because leaders had grown kinder, but because delay carried risk. Others struggled. Empires built on intimidation collapsed almost overnight. Their influence vanished when fear lost value. Without the ability to threaten, they had nothing left to offer. Black markets dried up. Illegal weapons failed mysteriously. Piracy became impossible when stolen ships refused to operate beyond certain parameters. Even lies lost power. Attempts to falsify records or erase past crimes triggered responses within the framework. Information could no longer be buried. Truth, once hidden behind distance and bureaucracy, became unavoidable. And through it all, humanity remained silent. Earth issued no further messages. Human fleets did not patrol the galaxy. Their presence faded until it became almost mythical. Some accused humanity of cowardice, of abandoning the galaxy to a cold system they had unleashed. Others understood the deeper truth. Humans had removed themselves because they did not trust power, even their own. That decision unsettled the universe more than any weapon ever could. Without a ruler to blame, there was no one to rebel against. The framework had no face, no ideology, no weakness, only memory. Years passed. New leaders rose who had never known war. They studied it like an ancient disease, deadly, irrational, and unnecessary. Military academies became historical institutes. Strategy shifted from conquest to risk reduction. Children grew up beneath stars that no longer burned from endless conflict. But peace came with a cost. Some worlds felt trapped. They resented the framework's cold logic. They whispered that the universe had become a cage, safe, but controlled. A radical movement emerged on the fringes, made up of species that believed suffering was the price of freedom. They planned, in secret, to break the system. They failed. Before their first attack launched, their ships lost power. Their communications collapsed. Their movement was isolated without a single casualty. The framework did not erase them. It rendered them irrelevant. The message was unmistakable. Rebellion against consequence was pointless. Over time, resistance faded, not crushed, but exhausted. Historians began to mark a dividing line in galactic history. Before the silence. After the silence. Everything changed at that boundary. Trade stabilized. Borders softened. Cultural exchange flourished, not because trust had increased, but because betrayal no longer paid. Slowly, something unexpected happened. Fear diminished. Not vanished, but softened. The framework was terrifying, yes, but it was also fair in a way the galaxy had never experienced. No species was exempt. No power was protected. The same rules applied to all. That consistency built something fragile and new. Confidence. Civilizations began taking risks again, not of conquest, but of cooperation. Joint projects formed. Shared research advanced faster than ever before. With war off the table, imagination expanded. And yet, one question remained unanswered. What about humanity? What did all this cost them? The answer surfaced decades later, buried in archival records finally released from Earth. Human society had not emerged unscarred. The framework had been built using human history as its foundation, including humanity's own crimes. Human militaries were now just as constrained as everyone else's. Human governments were just as accountable. Earth had accepted permanent limitations on itself. Some humans resented that deeply. They argued that humanity had sacrificed too much, that they had shackled themselves for a universe that once ignored their suffering. Others argued the opposite, that this was the only way humanity could live with what it had done in retaliation. Because even justified violence leaves scars. The truth was simpler. Humanity had chosen to live with consequence instead of pretending it didn't exist. And that choice reshaped their identity. Humans were no longer seen as conquerors or saviors or monsters. They became something rarer, a reference point. When civilizations debated policy, they asked not what they could get away with, but what humans would have done differently. When leaders faced temptation, they remembered the silence that followed Earth's retaliation. And in quiet moments, beneath calm stars, older beings told the younger ones stories, not of heroes, but of mistakes. They spoke of a time when small lives were erased because no one cared enough to stop it. They spoke of humans, underestimated and ignored, who learned patience instead of fear. They spoke of a retaliation so brutal that the universe went silent, not because it was destroyed, but because it finally listened. And as generations passed, the framework became less a threat and more a presence, a reminder woven into reality itself. It did not feel good. It did not forgive, but it was remembered, which was enough. Near the edge of known space, a long-abandoned human listening station continued its silent vigil. It recorded wars that never happened, crises that dissolved before igniting, choices made carefully, not bravely. Inside its final log, a human archivist had written a single line centuries earlier. Silence is not peace, but it is where peace begins. The galaxy had learned that lesson the hard way, and now, living within the quiet Earth had forced upon it, the universe faced its final reckoning. Not with humanity, but with itself. Long after the silence became normal, the universe began to forget why it existed. Not forget the events. Those were recorded everywhere, etched into physics itself, but forget the feeling of what came before. The constant tension, the casual cruelty, the quiet confidence that power could erase mistakes. New generations grew up under calm stars and stable borders. To them, the framework was not terrifying. It was simply how things were. They learned about wars the way ancient humans once learned about plagues, dangerous, irrational, and thankfully extinct. They studied old battle doctrines with curiosity, not fear. They saw images of destroyed fleets and erased systems and struggled to understand why anyone had thought that was normal. And so, inevitably, the questions changed. Not what happened, but who were the humans, really? Because humanity was still there. Earth still burned bright in the sky. Human ships still traveled, traded, explored. But they did so quietly, carefully, without dominance or spectacle. They did not rule. They did not command. They simply existed. That unsettled many. For a species that had reshaped the universe, humans were strangely uninterested in being remembered as masters. They refused monuments. They rejected titles. They dismantled organizations that tried to speak on their behalf. Human diplomats spoke rarely. When they did, they spoke plainly. The framework isn't ours, they would say. We just finished building it. Over time, that answer became legend. In academic circles, humans were studied endlessly. Their psychology, their history, their contradictions. How a species so capable of violence had chosen restraint. How beings born on a death world had learned patience instead of domination. Theories filled libraries. Some claimed humans were uniquely afraid of themselves. Others believed guilt drove everything they had done. A few argued that humanity was simply practical, tired of war, tired of loss. The truth was quieter. Humans remembered. They remembered burning cities from their own past. They remembered wars fought for pride, fear, or convenience. They remembered how easy it was to justify harm when distance made it abstract. And when their colonies were erased, when entire worlds died without ceremony, they recognized the pattern instantly. Not alien cruelty, familiar cruelty. So they did not answer it with rage. They answered it with certainty. Centuries later, that certainty became a myth. On distant worlds, children learned stories passed down through generations. The stories changed with each telling, but the core remained. They spoke of a time when the universe was loud, full of threats and battles and lies. A time when small lives disappeared because no one powerful cared. They spoke of humans as shadows at the edge of history, too small to fear, too distant to matter. And then they spoke of the silence, how it arrived without warning, how stars went dark without fire, how fleets vanished without a fight. They spoke of a retaliation so precise that it felt unreal. And finally, they spoke of what followed. Not domination, not extinction, but rules. Rules that did not argue. Rules that were not forgiven. Rules that I did not forget. In these stories, humans were never heroes. They were witnesses. Witnesses who decided that forgetting was more dangerous than hatred. On one quiet world, far from Earth, an elderly historian finished her final lecture to a hall of young scholars. She had lived her entire life under the framework. She had never heard a war alarm, never known invasion. A student raised a hand. If humans were so powerful, the student asked, why didn't they rule us? The historian paused for a long moment before answering. Because they knew what rulers become, she said. Another student asked, do humans still watch us? The historian smiled sadly. No, she said. They don't need to. She explained that the framework was not surveillance. It was memory made physical. Humans had not placed eyes on every world. They had placed consequence into the structure of reality. The universe watched itself now. That was the real change. Not the silence, not the fear, but the end of distance between action and outcome. As centuries passed, even resentment faded. Some civilizations came to respect humanity deeply, not for their power, but for their restraint. Others resented them forever, seeing the framework as a cage built by wounded beings who could not let go of the past. Humans accepted both views. They did not argue. They had learned that explanation did not heal loss. Only prevention did. On Earth, memorials still existed, but they were small, quiet places. Names carved into stone. Worlds remembered not for how they died, but that they had lived. No statues of fleets. No monuments to victory. Just remembrance. Because even justified retaliation left scars. And humanity refused to pretend otherwise. One final story spread across the galaxy, told in countless forms. It said that one day, far in the future, the framework would no longer be needed. That civilizations would choose restraint without enforcement. That memory would live in culture, not code. Humans never confirmed that story. They never denied it either. They simply said, if that day comes, the framework will fade on its own. Until then, it remained. Silent, unyielding, fair. And so the universe continued. Not perfect, not free of pain, but honest in a way it had never been before. The stars still burned. Life still struggled. Choices still mattered. But no one could erase the consequences anymore. That was humanity's legacy. Not as conquerors, not as gods, but as the species that taught the universe a lesson it could no longer forget. Power without memory is cruelty. And forgetting the weak is the first step toward destroying yourself. Long after Earth's retaliation, long after the last system went dark and the silence settled, the universe did not remember humanity for how many worlds they erased. It remembered them for what they refused to ignore. And in that remembrance, the quiet endured. Not as fearful, but as understanding.